Great to see everybody. Thank you so much for coming down. My name is Dune. I'm a program manager on the System Center Configuration Manager team. Working on a whole bunch of modern management goodness, some of which you guys have been hearing about this week. I'm here today with Chris Green.
Hi everybody, I'm Chris. How was lunch today? Not bad? I've heard the food here this year has actually been a bit better than last year. Is that true? Yeah, I think so too.
Great.
Good. Well, hopefully we'll keep you awake and not into that kind of food nap that you usually get into.
Yeah. So we're here to talk about security, Windows 10 security. Super exciting topic for us. And like any security talk, if you've been to them before, we have to start by setting the mood a little. And the mood for a security talk is fear. So we're going to get right into it. James Comey once said there are two kinds of companies, those that have been hacked and those that don't know that they've been hacked. This is the world that we live in. And the kinds of attacks that we're seeing are all kinds of different things. We see things like mischief. Somebody learns Python, figures, hey, I can use Python to figure out how many holes I can poke in this firewall, and I can get bigger and bigger targets behind that firewall. And that's kind of unsophisticated. We kind of know how to deal with that. But it does get worse. There's also fraud and theft type attacks. This is things that might come from organized crime. This is your typical ransomware kind of attack, just looking for Bitcoin, not really looking for that much else. And then we start getting to really scary territory with damage and disruption. This is your Petyas, your WannaCrys. This is where we have nations, terror groups, Dr. Evil himself, trying to cause damage, trying to harm companies, trying to leak their data, trying to disrupt political systems, and it's real scary stuff. Okay, are we there? Is the mindset there? Fear? Cool, thanks. Okay. So the question is, of course, how do we fight back? What can we do? Well, thankfully, Microsoft has a whole bunch of different services, features, and technologies that can help you protect against some of these things. And Chris and I today are going to touch on a couple of them. We're not going to touch on all of them, but since we're on stage, you know that we're going to be talking about that modern management toolbox, Intune and Configuration Manager. And what we're going to be focusing on today as well is the Windows security platform, how you manage it and how you use it to secure your devices, and conditional access paired with Azure Active Directory. And so we're going to dive right in. I'm going to start with the Windows security platform stuff, and then Chris is going to take care of the conditional access stuff for us because he was directly working on that. So, how do we think about the Windows security platform? Well, security is built into Windows 10. It's not bolted on. This isn't an afterthought. This isn't something that we have to check a box on our engineering process. This is something we think about every day and we think about as we build every Microsoft product. And our features in Windows 10 around security are focused on a few different things. First, they're focused on protection. This is the stuff that's supposed to prevent you from getting attacked in the first place and make you less vulnerable. These are things like Windows Defender Exploit Guard, Windows Defender Smart Screen, Windows Defender Application Control. We're going to talk about all these today. Then there's detection, which has several pieces. Detection is about figuring out when there might be an issue. There's several pieces of data that come into play when you're looking at detection. First of all, there's compliance data that comes from your management tool of choice. Then there's detection data that comes from our engines and antivirus on the client, Windows Defender Antivirus. And then finally, there's data that we get through the telemetry channel in it for Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection that can give you rich insight into the details of what's going on in your environment when you might be under attack and help you realize that sooner. And then there's response. Response can be anything from a small-scale remediation, whether it's automated or manual, or even a widespread configuration change. And so when we think about how to manage security, we're thinking about making all of these things easier. And the great thing about the Windows 10 security platform is that it's built into Windows. It doesn't require any kind of agent that you need to deploy or install, which means that there's no compatibility concerns around upgrade. It just works. It's part of the operating system. When you upgrade Windows, you upgrade your Windows 10 security stack. And so when we talk about management for this, I have to stand a little closer. When we talk about management today, what usually happens is we have to say that there's a lot going on. There's a lot of portals, there's a lot of granularity. And with great granularity comes great complexity. And as we move towards a modern management stance on this kind of stuff, we have to think about how we can tease apart that complexity and figure out what's really important for IT admins to configure and for our organizations to be secure. And so what I've been working on with our management teams, our Windows teams, and our customers is figuring out the right features and investments for us to get you what you need to stay secure. And by definition, that's going to be a kind of subset of the full level of granularity that we get, and that's okay, because our most secure customers are customers that really need to be completely air-gapped and DEF-CON level security. They're okay with accepting that complexity. But for the majority of our customers that need to be able to raise the bar of security in their environments, it needs to be simple, it needs to be doable, and it needs to be familiar. And so we're looking at building management for the most important security features to our customers into the modern management toolbox in Intune and Configuration Manager. And these management tools essentially become a one-stop shop for policy authoring, deployment and targeting, and compliance monitoring, like they are for your other policies, and some security features today. But we're looking at really making it a more unified experience and consolidating. And so, whether you have a traditional approach for managing security and you're using on-prem infrastructure like SCCM, you can manage all these features, and you can manage the latest features in Windows 10. And if you're using a modern approach with MDM management through Intune, you can also manage these same features. And so we try and talk about security management as kind of as a combination of these two. Depending on whichever choice you get all the same options to configure in your environment, which is great for us because we're unique in the security space and management working on these teams in that we're really close to parity between the on-prem and Intune spaces for management, which is great for us, and it's great for our customers as well. So the focus for the management tools in terms of monitoring and the data that we give back to you is on making sure that the desired state of your devices is where you want it to be. It's making sure that you're actually deployed and making sure that what you've configured is really what's out there in your environment. That's the number one priority for who we tend to refer to as security admins. You might have security admins in your environment. You might just have IT admins who wear many hats, depending on your scale. And then there's also another persona that we work with really heavily called the security operations folks. Those are people who do incident handling, incident response, threat response, and those are the folks that would be working in the Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection space and Windows Defender Security Center, making sure that they can remediate and detect when there's a real threat going on. Next, we're focusing on really driving simplicity. Hands up if you ever tried to deploy a whitelisting solution in your environment. Okay, a lot of hands. Keep your hand up if it was easy. No hands. Yeah. So whitelisting is a great way to secure an environment. It's a heavily accepted way, and it's not easy to deploy. It's not easy to think about, and that's one of the technologies that we're looking to really make easy to deploy. 2 clicks, I have a whitelisting solution deployed in my environment. That's the dream, and we're headed towards it. Finally, we're looking to drive an easy transition from traditional to modern management of security features. You guys, we've announced this week, co-management is a huge deal for us, probably the biggest deal for me that since I joined the team that we've announced. So we're really excited about it. And what co-management means for security is that eventually security will be one of these workloads that you can migrate management of from Config Manager to Intune. And that's why when I say single, that's why I can look at you with a straight face and say single source of truth and have this and this on the slide, is because you're not really going to be using both at the same time. Typically, if you're in a co-managed scenario, you're going to be using one at a time and then transitioning. And if you're the kind of customer who's ready for modern today, you can absolutely go and do modern management for all of these settings today as well without having to worry about the co-management scenario. And so the security platform has this rich set of features, and we're going to talk about all of these. We're investing in management, in our management tools for all of these, and there's some really exciting ones in here. This is focused on the features that the Windows team has been working really hard on improving in the Fall Creators Update. And I wanted to take a quick note as an excuse to use this marketing resource that I think kind of looks like Aaron from my team. Some of you might know Aaron. Aaron always says, if you want to go fast with Windows, you have to go fast with Config Manager. And that's also true of security. If you want to stay secure with Windows, you kind of have to go fast with Config Manager until you've changed how you manage Windows servicing and you move that workload across the co-management bridge over to modern. You're going to have to make sure you keep your Config Manager infrastructure up to date if you want to be able to work on the latest Windows security features. And trust me, Windows is not done building out new, better, and great Windows security features. So stay up to date. We love Current Branch. It's really easy to upgrade. If you have questions about it, talk to me after. And so these are all the features that are built in Windows. And these all come with your average E3 Windows Enterprise offering. For our E5 customers, they get even more. Our E5 customers get Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection. And Advanced Threat Protection contains all the same Windows Security Platform features that were in the list that we just showed, but it also gives customers access to rich endpoint detection and response solutions where they can detect immediately that there's a threat in their environment. They can build a timeline, a detailed timeline of how an incident, a security incident is progressing, and they can use that to get to a root cause quickly and remediate. And the most impressive thing about Advanced Threat Protection really is the staggering optics that we have. So Advanced Threat Protection is leveraging telemetry data from every Windows 10 Enterprise device on the planet in order to provide insights that are relevant to devices in your environment. And we also don't stop at endpoints. We're also looking at other clouds that we have in Configuration Manager. You might have noticed when you're wandering around in the expo that there's more than one threat protection booth, which seems a little confusing. That's because there's not only one ATP at Microsoft. There's Azure ATP, Office ATP, and Windows Defender ATP. And these ATP solutions don't exist in a vacuum. We have communication between these clouds, and we can use the intelligence that we share across them to provide better security for endpoints. And so we're going to dive into a whole bunch of features here. We're going to do a whole bunch of demos from that list, show you what management for these looks like. Nobody's ever seen this, so we're really excited to show you. And keep in mind as you look at these that all these features are better when paired with Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection. And as of the Fall Creators Update, Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection also has knowledge into which features are configured on endpoints so that we can tell whether Device Guard is enabled, for example, whether Credential Guard is enabled, and use that to drive changes in an environment. So that's another extra reason to think about as you go through the next few slides. And so with that, we're going to dive into features. So first up, we're going to go in alpha order, because why not? So Windows Defender Application Control. Who knows what that is? Who thinks it's brand new? Hands up. Good, okay, you guys are paying attention. So Windows Defender Application Control is really kind of a new name for something that should be familiar for many folks, as it's shipped since the first release of Windows 10 RTM, Device Guard. So Device Guard has always kind of had this umbrella. And under the Device Guard umbrella, there are two features: configurable code integrity and hypervisor protected code integrity. Configurable code integrity is like app locker. This is where we were talking about whitelisting a moment ago. This is the technology that we're talking about. So configurable code integrity is like app locker, only better. It works deeper in the operating system and it can also provide protection against kernel threats, not just user context threats. And hypervisor protected code integrity is a separate feature that's separately deployable. I repeat, separately deployable. That has a bunch of hardware and firmware prerequisites that configurable code integrity does not. And so having these two features under the same umbrella was a little confusing for our customers. And so HVCI, hypervisor protected code integrity, is still a great way to harden the security of configurable code integrity, but having them under this umbrella together didn't really make sense for our customers, or didn't really help customers understand this super complex concept of whitelisting, and we're trying to make it easy, right? That's the name of the game. So in Fall Creators Update, configurable code integrity is going to become a first-class member of the Windows Defender security platform family, and it will be called Windows Defender Application Control. And so Windows Defender Application Control only represents that configurable code integrity piece. And so there are no hardware or firmware prerequisites for Windows Defender Application Control. TPM is not even on the table. So if you're wondering about whether TPM is relevant, it's not for HVCI even at all. So wanted to say that as well. And you might still hear the words Device Guard thrown around. Well, definitely this week, because we just announced this now. I actually walked by some sessions where they were going, Device Guard, and we were going, we're changing the name. Device Guard is still going to be used in practice to refer to a configuration state that constitutes the combination of Windows Defender Application Control and hypervisor protected code integrity. So if a device has both of those, you might still hear some Windows engineers say, well, you've got Device Guard enabled. Device Guard. So hopefully that's a little clearer, because I know that's been a point of confusion. Again, if you have questions about that, feel free to let me know. And so what exactly does application control do? I jumped into a little before, but just to provide some more detail. It allows you to strongly control what is allowed to run on endpoints and what isn't allowed to run. And we've been doing some work to make this really easy with our management tools. If you use the modern management toolbox to manage Windows Defender application control, then Windows components and store apps just work, because we use the inbox policy that's manifested into Windows and add the necessary rules that we need for our management tools in order to make sure that Windows will boot, that any drivers that are certified by the Windows Hardware Quality Dev Lab are allowed to run, which means that your Lenovos and your HPs and your Dells will boot and they will work. And then we take that baseline and we expand upon it to make sure that other things you need to run will work. So apps that are deployed through Config Manager, for example, automatically get trust with the Managed Installer technology. Some of you might have read a blog that I wrote in 2016 about how to use Managed Installer with App Blocker. Managed Installer in the Fall Creators Update is focused on code integrity. Though App Blocker is used to point to the Managed Installer, we actually still use code integrity for the enforcement when you use one of our policies. So that's an important thing to call out. And in the Fall Creators Update, we're super excited to announce that, well, this has already been announced, but I like to say that on stage because why not? Automatically trust apps with good reputation. So this is going to be a recurring theme in the presentation. The concept of application reputation and address reputation are essential to some of the new features that we're working on. So services in Windows, like Smart Screen and Windows Defender Antivirus, have a context of whether an application is good or bad based on all the data that we can collect from every Windows 10 device and sample submissions and that kind of thing. If we see something new, our antivirus engine tries to figure out whether it's good or bad, and then can use that data going forward, and that data changes over time. And so what this means, this is called, by the way, and I don't know why I don't have it on my slide, Intelligent Security Graph Authentication for Windows Defender Application Control. And what this means is that any application that has good reputation will be allowed to run on your lockdown device. So think things like Office, Chrome, 7-Zip, you name it. The tools that your end users are using will run on these devices. And so we like to think that this is a really, really big step forward in terms of the manageability of this and the deployability of this. And that's why we felt, before we had this feature, we were hesitant to provide management through MDM with Intune. And now that we have this, we are feeling really good about shipping management for Windows Defender application control in Intune. And I'm going to show you a demo of that now. So we got the Intune console here. If I hop under device configuration, I'm going to be building a profile over the course of the presentation. And so we'll create it at the end and assign it at the very end of the presentation as we build in a couple more features into our profile as we progress. So we're going to create a new profile. And we're going to use this profile to specify a bunch of security settings for our Fall Creators Update devices. And so there's a bunch of new stuff here. You might notice that this isn't here if you're frantically looking on your laptop. That's because it's coming soon for everybody except my lucky little laptop here. And we're going to start by looking at application control, and we're going to dive into a couple more here as well. So when I said 2 clicks for deployment of a whitelisting solution, I really was not kidding. You get to make 2 choices in this wizard, and then you go and assign it to devices. The first choice is, do you want it to be off or enabled in terms of enforcement, or audit mode. So audit mode is another recurring theme you might see across the Windows security platform. Audit mode means we're not going to actually block anything, we're just going to audit events to the local client event logs that you can go and investigate. You can use Windows Event Forwarding to forward those over somewhere else and have a look at them. So that's what audit mode means. And so we're going to put this in enforce mode. And then once you choose a mode, you get the second option here, and this is to allow or not allow trust for that intelligent security graph authentication. So if you do not set this, then the following things will be able to run on the device: Windows components, Windows Store apps, drivers that your machine needs to boot. If you set it to yes, all of those things that I just mentioned will still be allowed to run, and we add things that our security services know to be of good reputation. And so I'm going to set this to enable and hit OK. And application control management in Intune is really that easy. Can I get a little applause for that? A little tiny one. Thank you. We're excited about it. There was a session yesterday on it, and I love doing the Windows track sessions on whitelisting. This was probably the first time that I was in one of those, and there was actually a pretty big config manager admin representation in one of those sessions. So that means good things to me, because previously there was nobody there except me who knew about SCCM, and that means that our IT is starting to learn that this stuff is important, or at least that they need to tell their security folks that this stuff is important. So, Windows Defender Application Guard. Windows Defender Application Guard is another protection feature. And this feature is all about isolating Microsoft Edge when insecure sites are accessed. So you get to specify this boundary that represents which parts of your network are corporate and which parts are not. And then when this is deployed, if any users try and go to a location that is not defined as corporate or safe, then their browser, Microsoft Edge, is going to launch up in a virtualized container. And now, that means that nothing that happens in the browser can touch the host. And so end users can do whatever they want in that container and accidentally install as much malware as they want, and your host is never going to get compromised. And that's what Application Guard is all about. And when we talk about Application Guard, there's this analogy that people use to help folks understand some of the differences between our features. We talk about castle versus jail. So an example of a castle security feature is Windows Defender Credential Guard. Windows Defender Credential Guard takes things that it knows are important, like information about your credentials and services that handle your credentials, and puts those in a virtualized container. Whereas Application Guard, Windows Defender Application Guard, is a jail feature. We take things that we know are bad, or that at least that we don't know are good, and we put those in a virtualized container so that they can't touch the host. And the scenario really here is phishing emails is a great example of a scenario that this would help with. It won't help you. It won't help your end users if they're willing to enter their corporate credentials on wherever they go in here, but it will help them be protected from any malicious activity that happens on a link that they might click. So if I get an email like this, I'm going to go, that's weird. I'm not in the Army. I'm not going to click on this. But if I was working in an intelligence agency and this was more applicable to me, I might believe it. And I've heard somebody say, I don't actually remember who it was, I probably should, that there's somebody in every organization who will click anything. And that's the danger, because you only really need one person to click it, and then you could be in big trouble. And so if you were to have Windows Defender Application Guard deployed, and you click on this link, that end user doesn't necessarily even know that anything is wrong. They can show you a normal looking website. They can show you a website that you're familiar with. And in the back end, they've already navigated to a hostile location in between going to the potentially real safe website. And there could have been malicious activity happening on that interim step where they're exploiting known browser vulnerabilities, or they're doing other stuff that's going to otherwise corrupt your host. And so Application Guard is designed to protect against that kind of thing. And so I'm going to show you a demo of configuration for Application Guard in Config Manager. Here we go. So I also wanted to point out that with co-management being announced, some folks get a little antsy and go, wait, is Config Manager going away? This is an example of something that's a cutting-edge Windows security feature that we're letting up management for in Config Manager. There is no way that we're going away anytime soon. We're continuing to innovate. We're continuing to ship these security features as they come out. And so if I want to configure Windows Defender Application Guard, there's going to be a new node under Endpoint Protection coming soon as well. And we create the policy, give it a name. Your name has to be misspelled. And then you're going to be able to specify a bunch of settings about what can and can't happen across that boundary between the host and the virtualized container. So you can choose whether, for example, you want the clipboard to be able to access the container. And you can choose whether you want to be able to print PDFs in the container. And then you can do things like decide whether trusted sites are allowed to load content from untrusted sites. Sometimes you might have a trusted site that might try and load an ad or a plugin or something that might not be on the list, but you might trust that if you know that the origin is something that you have a trust vector for. And so you set all these settings up. Oh, there we go. And then you're going to specify your corporate network definition. Now this might look familiar to any customers who have deployed Windows Information Protection. That's not a coincidence. It is the very same list on the client. That's because the mental model on the client for the two features is identical. You're looking for pieces of your network that are corporate and known to be secure, and pieces of your network that are not corporate, and then you know to be that could very well be insecure, the Wild West, if you will. And so you specify network settings here, and then you basically can create the policy and go deploy. I'm not going to do that because I happen to know that it'll take a couple seconds and I'm worried about time. And so that's Windows Defender Application Guard. Once you have that network boundary set up and those settings about how the container is handled, you enable the feature in Windows and you're good to go in the Fall Creators Update. Next up, this is really whirlwind. I hope I'm not going too fast. We're trying to cover a lot of ground here. If I need to slow down, somebody wave at me. Okay, I'll take her easy. So Windows Defender Exploit Guard is kind of a set of 4 features. And these sub-features are all focused on reducing the number of ways that you can attack Windows, reducing the attack surface area, and providing rich host intrusion prevention system. And these 4 features kind of do similar things, but they're definitely distinct. And so we're going to go through each of them, and then I'm going to show you what the management experience is like for these in Intune. And so first up is attack surface reduction. Attack surface reduction is a set of configurable settings in Windows 10 that let you decide whether certain actions can be taken from different categories of threats. So one category of threat that's been quite big in the news recently has been Office macro exploits, for example. So you can use attack surface reduction to restrict the behavior of Office macros, to prevent them from dropping executable content, to prevent them from accessing direct memory, this kind of thing. And so that's attack surface reduction. There's also a different set of settings for scripts and for content that's being downloaded from an email in attack surface reduction. Next up is controlled folder access. Controlled folder access leverages the same kind of reputation data that we were talking about in the application control scenario. So controlled folder access says there's a set of folders on my device that users tend to use to store their corporate data. And by default, that list is set to the built-in folders, my documents, my pictures, desktop, this kind of thing. And those folders, by default, are protected with controlled folder access. And that means that only applications with good reputation, in the same way that we talked about for Windows Defender application control, are able to take write actions in those folders. And what that means is that if you were to download a piece of ransomware, for example, that was going to encrypt your entire drive, any write actions to those folders would not be allowed. And so even if the ransomware were to cook your entire boot sector, if you know your BitLocker decryption code, you can get in there and those files are untouched on disk in the file system. And so control folder access is all about protecting you from ransomware. Third, there's exploit protection. Exploit protection is a set of global control flow and exploit mitigations that you can specify on a global level and on a per app level. And I'll show you how to do that in a moment. Finally, there's network protection. Network protection says, for executables on my device, I have a set of addresses on the internet that I know are malicious based on this reputation data. If we have network protection configured, then connections to those known bad locations on the network will be blocked. And so we have configurability for that as well. I'm going to quickly show you these in Intune. I think I'm going really fast, but I'm also slow on time. Here. So Windows Defender Exploit Guard will be configurable in Intune and Config Manager. And the Intune experience looks like this. You can specify settings for all 4 features. As I had mentioned, you can go and specify a whole bunch of restrictions for Office. So let's specifically look at Office macros and block them from creating executable content. And then let's block Windows Win32 imports from Office macro code as well. In control folder access, the 2 knobs that we allow you to configure are which applications are allowed to bypass control folder access. This is because not all line of business applications will have good reputation just because of the scale at which they're deployed. And so you can add those to a list here, and then those applications get access to controlled folders. The last one is a set of additional folders. So if you have folders in your environment that you know end users are storing data, they can go there. Network filtering is the simplest thing to configure. You turn it on or you turn it off. That's really it. We love features like that.
I love those settings.
Those are great.
Those are the best.
They make my job easy. Forgive me. And in exploit protection, you're actually going to use Windows Defender Security Center on the client. And I can show you what that UI looks like. You're going to use Windows Defender Security Center to have a look at a Windows 10 device and use that Windows 10 device and Windows Defender Security Center to create an XML policy. You never have to directly manipulate the XML, but you use the UI in this app to create that XML file, and then you can import that into Intune and deploy it. And devices that receive that XML policy will have the same policy that you specified. I'm going to move along because I'm a little worried about time. Finally, I want to talk about Windows Defender Firewall. Firewall is a place that we know that there's been pain around manageability, and we're really looking to make that better. We have manageability in Config Manager, and we've had it there for a while, but it's really basic. It basically says on, off. That's about it. Block everything. On, off, block everything, which isn't too useful for our customers. And there was no, previously, before the Fall Creators Update, there was no MDM support. And so we're happy that Intune is going to be providing management for firewall settings on Windows 10 Fall Creators Update devices. And there will be rich management basically across all the new settings that are supported. And so you get a rich management experience for those. I'm not actually going to show you the demo for that because I want to make sure Chris has enough time to talk to you about conditional access. So just to wrap up the Windows security platform piece, basically, we're looking to provide rich management for all these new features in the toolbox that is used for modern management in Intune and Configuration Manager. And we think that the promise of having these security features built in Windows is super valuable for our customers. We think that having a unified configuration experience for these features is the best thing that we can do for you guys. And finally, I wanted to once more say that all these features are augmented even further for customers who own Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection, because Advanced Threat Protection lets you have intelligence about which features you've configured in your management solutions and which features are enabled on devices, and use that to help tease apart how a certain issue might have or might not have circumvented the security that you have in place. And with that, I'll hand it over to Chris to talk about conditional access.
Thanks, Dune. So Dune covered a lot of capabilities that are now exposed through Windows 10 and can be managed through either Configuration Manager or Intune that help you secure these managed Windows devices in your organization. Now we switch gears a little bit in terms of how that can also apply to other scenarios you may be trying to achieve, particularly access control, which often comes up in the context of security. Conditional access is a term you've probably heard quite a bit now if you're at all looking into aspects of device management through Intune, migrating organizations to O365, or moving basically from on-prem to the cloud. The term conditional access is actually quite a broad set of capabilities. It's primarily geared around Azure Active Directory technology, whereby Azure AD has implemented a policy engine formed around their identity provider in the cloud that allows organizations to set quite flexible access control policies to a number of different resources that they may be protecting. And by the way, I'll tie all this back into Windows security in a minute, so just bear with me for a second. When we talk about conditional access, we sort of think around three primary pivots. The first are around conditions, policy conditions. And the way I like to think about these is when should this policy apply to a particular authentication request? So for example, I may have a certain policy for a set of users, so their user identity would be a condition. And that could be the identity of that user or what group they're a part of. So we often will set different membership criteria and different policies for these group memberships. So that's kind of a basic example of a user condition. But increasingly, we're adding more intelligence to that with something called Azure AD Identity Protection, which can assign sort of a risk assessment for that user and their authentication session. So for example, if I'm coming in from a kind of particularly risky location, maybe a high-risk country or so forth, IP can actually flag that session and block the login. So then we pivot over to a set of conditions with respect to devices, and this is really where we come in because this is kind of our domain. So you may have different access criteria depending on the device that a user is coming in from. So for example, as you're enabling certain user groups for mobility, you can then set policies around the types of platforms they're coming from. And in fact, you may have a completely different policy for mobile devices versus Windows. Other aspects though, and this is really where Windows security comes into play, is we can now take signals from the devices that are under management through Intune or Configuration Manager and have that also as a condition to impact access. So for example, we can do kind of some basic checks around the basic device configuration, but increasingly we're starting to take signals in from things like Windows Defender to assign a device risk for that device when it attempts to access a resource. And then we have other conditions related to what app are they coming from or what app are they trying to access, as well as what is their location. Are they coming from a certain kind of trusted IP range, or are they coming from some random or unknown location that we need to step up their security? So then we switch gears a little bit and look at policy controls. And policy controls are, think of this as the then and an if-then statement. So if this condition applies, then apply this policy control. So the simple ones that we have in place are, either allow or block. That's pretty obvious. But if we choose to allow, we may actually want to step up the security requirement. So for one example, we may require multi-factor authentication. Or in another example, they may need to fix their compliance criteria or their compliance settings on their device if we can't do it automatically for them through Intune. We're expanding this set of controls to also include what we call session restrictions. I won't get too much into this topic because it's a bit more advanced. I actually just gave a talk prior to this one around more in depth on conditional access. So offline, if you're kind of looking more into that, go check out the recording. And then finally, of course, you're going to have to consider what apps are these users trying to access. Conditional access can provide protections for O365 and other SaaS apps in the cloud, but increasingly on-premise apps, including those published through Azure App Proxy, and now we're even looking at supporting Exchange hybrid environments with on-prem mailboxes. So when it comes to conditional access and kind of figuring out when can this actually apply to my Windows 10 devices, it's good to step back and kind of frame how exactly are these devices being managed and how are they represented in Active Directory or Azure AD. So we tend to classify this in kind of the following dimensions. So going across the top, we look at, well, especially coming from traditional on-prem environment, are these work devices? And historically, they've been domain joined to AD. They've also been managed through Config Manager, pretty straightforward. On the far extreme, we also have cloud-only managed devices. So these are devices that are Azure AD joined, they're managed through Intune, they really have no kind of footprint with on-prem. We're seeing more and more of these, but this is kind of the other extreme on that spectrum. But now with the announcements around co-management with Intune and Configuration Manager, we actually have a middle category which fits really nicely for a lot of organizations as they move to modern management. And that is what's now known as hybrid Azure AD join. So these are on-prem domain join Windows devices that are also registered with Azure Active Directory to have a cloud identity and preference, which is then sort of the key for any device-based conditional access decision that can be subsequently made. And so those are the same devices that are also going to be through co-management, which we just announced, managed through both Configuration Manager and Intune. And in fact, Intune can then be kind of the authority around what does it mean for that device to be secure and compliant in order to access all of these services that I'm trying to protect. I have to do the Dune trick and wave my arm over here. So then, one thing we're also starting to see are increasingly our personal devices. So these may be devices that are either bring your own or choose your own, but essentially are being brought in. They're not traditionally managed or known as a corporate-owned device. And for these, there's also an option here in terms of being able to register these devices through Azure AD and have them managed through Intune. So you can now provide options for both corporate-owned devices as well as personally owned, and provide access control and make sure that those devices are all secure before accessing your resource. So when we talk about conditional access, think of these three categories, and those are really the options available to you when you want to deploy this solution. So I think this is kind of a handy reference for you when you're evaluating this over time. So yeah, so you've probably seen this slide already, but with co-management, this has actually enabled this kind of middle interim category as you're making that journey from traditional on-prem presence and management into the cloud. So when it comes to conditional access and co-management, a key kind of concept around that is this thing called a compliance policy. So if you've worked on Config Manager or on Intune and have seen this before, essentially what this policy does is define sort of the security baseline for a managed PC. So I'll show you in a minute, but it outlines all of the kind of settings and signals that define what it means for a device to be compliant in order to access a protected service. With co-management, the Config Manager team has exposed a way to transition various management workloads from Configuration Manager over into Intune, and compliance policy is the key one that you need in order to transition over to conditional access. A lot of organizations have been looking for ways to deploy conditional access for Config Manager managed PCs, and this is really the way to do that, especially if you've looked at it before. We have sort of an implementation of it, but it has kind of these prerequisites around a hybrid deployment with Intune. This actually moves away from that and allows you to deploy if you're a standalone tenant. So with that, I'll actually switch over to the demo and kind of round that out from the Intune standpoint. So looking at the Intune console, as devices come under co-management, you'll actually start to see them in the Intune console. Let me try that again. I think it needs to wake up. Oh. Third time the charm. Okay, there we go, see? So the device list will populate with all of the devices I have under Intune management, but also as PCs start to migrate over to co-management, I can also see those show up as well. And so under the managed by column, I can see MDM being Intune, and then below that I can see MDM/config manager, which are those that now have that co-management posture. So as devices then start to have their compliance state evaluated by the Intune compliance policy, you'll start to then see, you can see the red bang there with not compliant. That's Intune determining, even though you're under co-management, Intune is the authority to say what it means for that device to be actually compliant and give it access to protected resources. So, even then, if I want to click down, I can look at more details at the device. I can then go to the device compliance tab for monitor on that device and see even more detail that, in fact, this tenant has a couple of different policies. Obviously, it's not applicable for the Mac policy, but this is the Windows 10 compliance policy that's out of compliance, and I can drill in even further than that. So then let's take a look at a little bit more detail on how exactly do I define this device compliance policy. So I go back to the main blade and then switch over to device compliance. And I can see my list here. I'm just going to go ahead and create a new one because we do support compliance policies across all of the platforms that Intune supports today. And in fact, there are big deployments of Intune across MDM and Windows management. Oh, and of course my caps lock is on. So I'll select Windows 10 as my OS, and then immediately I start seeing some of the policy settings available. One of the ones that is fairly unique to Windows 10 is Windows Health Attestation Service, which is a remote health attestation service hosted by actually the Windows org, so Microsoft, whereby Windows 10 devices can boot up and then encrypt a an encrypted boot log secured by the device TPM, send that blob up into this service in the cloud, and have that service remotely attest to the validity of that boot log and in fact take certain properties out of it so that you can set policies around those. So three of the ones that we've exposed through Intune are those that you can see there. So verifying that BitLocker is enabled, making sure that secure boot is enabled, and requiring code integrity. And we're adding to this list over time, but this is one of the more unique compliance checks that we have available. So we also have more, one of the more basic ones is around the OS version, which can be used for a variety of different things. If you're looking for an OS version that is compatible with a certain feature that you're looking for, you can set that property. One of the other capabilities that, for those of you who are familiar with Intune at all and conditional access, we've enabled another thing called a non-compliance action framework, which allows organizations to essentially chain together different actions based on determining that a device is out of compliance. So the kind of the default one is that you're going to get blocked from accessing resources protected by conditional access. But this has exposed other possibilities. So the first one that we're now showing is the ability to set essentially an email to the end user telling them that they've fallen out of compliance. They need to resolve whatever issue has been identified. And this would especially be the case if it's something that Config Manager or Intune couldn't do themselves. and then ask them to remediate, but give them a bit of time before they are actually cut off from email. So just to give you an example of that. So what this will do is load up a number of different email message templates that I can sort of go off and pre-populate. So for example, I may want to have a different notification based on different regions, or I may want to give them a sequence of warnings before I finally cut off their access, because as we all know, all the end users actually read email from IT. So we'll nag them a lot and just kind of, don't say I didn't tell you I was going to do this. So these warnings, that you can write essentially whatever you need to. You can include some branding information and sort of give some action description around what the end user needs to do, if anything, in order to kind of remediate their device and regain access. So this is something that it sort of stay tuned in this area, because we'll be adding lots of other sort of non-compliance action capabilities to this framework. So the last thing I just wanted to show you sort of around this scenario was, so I showed you kind of the reporting and the co-management aspect. I've shown you the compliance policy and the conditions and some of the actions that you can trigger around that. The other key step here, though, is to set an actual conditional access policy against the protected resource. So coming back to kind of my main Intune blade, I'll then drill into the conditional access policies that I have configured for this tenant. So these are policies that actually live in Azure AD. You can access this list from the Intune blade, but these live in AAD and are set against your tenant. So in this example, I may want to set a policy for, let's say, email. And I'm going to protect, I'm going to maybe assign it to a subset of my users first before I deploy it out globally. I'll give this one to Brad's team. They need extra protection. Of course, I'll select the apps. So here I can actually specify Exchange. And then I can set other conditions that I kind of outlined earlier. So things around sign-in risk. I think, in the context of Windows security, we could make this policy specific to Windows. And then we can also specify things like the client app type. So this would refer to, generally we boil it down to browser versus desktop clients, or in the case of mobile platforms, it would be mobile apps. So then we come to I think the more kind of relevant part, which is, okay, now that I've specified when this policy should kick in, now I want to define what the actual security requirements or criteria are. So in terms of Windows, really the two key requirements that are options for you are the kind of, here, I'll just check them so it's more obvious, are where we say require that a device needs to be marked as compliant, or require a device's domain join brackets hybrid Azure AD. So what these mean are, in the case where device must be marked as compliant, this is where you're actually checking for that compliant state. So Intune is writing into AAD around the compliant state of the device. The inputs could be from things like device health attestation, versioning, and pretty soon other signals that we get from Windows Defender. The other option refers to the hybrid Azure AD configuration, which was kind of that middle category that I outlined earlier. This does not check for compliant state. But what we've seen with organizations who are deploying conditional access is this is kind of a good first step towards implementing and supporting conditional access in your organization. So what all this is really checking is this device hybrid Azure AD registered? So is it, really it boils down to, is it AD joined, and that kind of infers that the device is under typically management by configuration manager. So it doesn't have the additional compliance check, which we would suggest and recommend, but might be a good first step for your organization as you move towards an implementation of conditional access. Okay, I think we can switch back, thanks. You're handy switching those things. I should bring you for every talk, I think.
I'd be happy to help.
Yeah, thanks, Dune. From the architectural side, this kind of just outlines how this whole interaction works. So as I mentioned before, Intune is essentially taking these compliance signals as it evaluates these managed devices, and then is able to write that compliance state into Azure Active Directory. If in some cases, especially around personally owned devices, this can actually start from the step of a user, just from a kind of blanket, unmanaged device, maybe a personal device from home. They go to try and add their email account, or they go and try and download a Word document from SharePoint Online. And they'll then be confirmed as, hey, I don't know anything about you. Azure AD has no record of this device. So the user will then be sort of driven through the process of enrolling into Intune, joining with Azure Active Directory, and then having Intune deliver all of those policies and compliance evaluations. Intune can then take that evaluation and set that state against the device record in Azure Active Directory, so that that state is sort of stored and used for subsequent access control decisions into things like SharePoint Online. So the conditional access policy that I was showing you earlier is what AAD will check against whenever it gets a sort of an incoming request from that client. So as soon as the device is managed by Intune and Configuration Manager, it has some sort of AD presence, AD can then make that decision to say, yes, I know about you, I know you're compliant, I'm going to let you in. Another sort of similar scenario, but is a little bit special, is around support for VPN and Azure AD conditional access. And this is, again, something specific to Windows 10, but essentially allows for remote access into VPN based on that kind of managed and compliant state that I've been talking about. This has a bit more detail about exactly how that works, but the key thing here and sort of the innovative part is that Azure AD, looking to support a variety of different VPN clients, has enabled this capability. Basically, it will look at an incoming request, see if it can identify the device, and if it can, and if it knows it's managed and everything, it'll issue the device a shortlist certificate that can then authenticate into the VPN server. So we think this is quite an effective way to kind of leverage the power and capabilities around conditional access and be able to extend that to kind of different remote access scenarios. All right.
I'm actually going to, because we have time, I'd love to finish the firewall demo.
Do it, Dune.
All right.
We all want to see it, man.
Okay, that's great. Who wants to see a firewall demo? Yeah, hype. That's great. Okay. It's so exciting. I say that and I come over here, I'm like, oh, maybe not. We're really happy to have this here, really. It is a big deal to have it in Intune because we never had this before. Sorry to context, everybody just context switch really hard. I should give you a moment. Okay.
And we're good.
We're good, yeah, okay. Whew. We're back in Windows Defender firewall land, and we're finishing up that profile that we had. I just wanted to make sure Chris had time to finish his whole thing because conditional access is a really
He's a very considerate guy. We're both Canadian, by the way, so it's sort of
in case that wasn't clear.
Hey.
So for firewall and Intune, what you can do is you get a bunch of settings that are global. These global settings apply to every firewall profile. So whether it's public domain or private, these will apply across the board. You can do things like IPsec exemptions. You can enable, you can block or enable file transfer protocol. And so these are all settings that apply to basically every single profile. And then for each profile, you get a set of settings, and they're the same for every profile, that are already quite a bit more granular than what we have in Config Manager today. And that's not to say that we won't make our firewall management better in Config Manager. It is something that we're hoping to do, and we're currently gathering feedback on the right way to do that. So if you have input, let me know. So we're definitely going to enable firewall on the domain network. We can do things like block shielded. We can block unicast responses to multicast broadcasts. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here. This should be familiar for folks who have been using advanced firewall to deploy this stuff. The advantage of having it in your modern management toolkit is, of course, the targeting, rich targeting, and compliance data that you get from a management tool that you don't get from group policy and advanced firewall. So much of these settings are hopefully familiar to most of you, or those of you who've dabbled in network security, and this can be now deployed from Intune, which is really exciting. And so now we've got this deployment profile that we've created with all our security settings in the session. We're going to go ahead and create the profile. Here we go. And then now that we've created the profile, we go and assign it to a group. And here we go. I've got my group for the first ring of my pilot of security for Fall Creators Update devices. And there we go. We're assigned. We're deploying security, and we're deploying security in a modern way. And it's super exciting. So let's cut back over to the conclusion slide. Not that there's that much going on there. Hopefully we've told you some things that you didn't know previously about some of the new Windows security platform features. We've emphasized the importance of coupling this stuff with Windows Defender ATP. And finally, Chris, thank you so much for giving us the lowdown on conditional access. Conditional access is a powerful tool in your security arsenal in terms of making sure that devices that are compliant can't reach the network. Or can't reach corporate resources. That's a strong and powerful thing for an end user who might, honest to goodness, not remember to turn BitLocker on. And security-obsessed folks will know that physical access to a BitLocker machine, game over. So if the device doesn't have BitLocker on, you certainly don't want that device to have any valuable corporate data on it. So we've gone and targeted that policy to Brad and his directs. And so if Brad forgot to turn on BitLocker, though I'm sure he has BitLocker on, that guy knows his stuff, he wouldn't have access to email, and therefore nobody would be able to compromise his emails even if they did gain access to that device. And with that, we've got about 12 minutes, and we'd love to take some of your questions.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. We've been asked if you could please come into the inner 3 aisles if you have questions, the inner 6 microphones.
While people are filing up, we also wanted to mention Fast Track. We'd be remiss if we didn't. Fast Track is a super important program for M365 customers or prospective M365 customers. If you already own Intune licenses and you're looking for a helping hand in getting deployed, then go talk to the folks at the M365 Fast Track booth over in the expo in south side of things. And then we'll start the questions right away.
All right. As far as Application Guard is concerned, the virtual machine that's created to run code that's not or go to websites that are not trusted, is that set up and torn down with each session that's opened? Is that a virtual machine is that the Credential Guard virtual machine? Is that
so? It's not the same. It's not the same virtual machine as Credential Guard. It's kind of they're referred to as virtualization trustlets, and they're
like
separate
micro virtualization, like Bromium kind of thing.
I wouldn't know, but
okay.
But for code integrity, there's a virtualized container around the code integrity process. For CreditGuard, it's around LSA, and this is really its own virtual machine in AppGuard with a separate kernel and strict policies in place about what's allowed to run on that kernel. I believe it's created once per. I don't know if it's per login or per boot session.
Okay.
So if you go several times, it'll connect back in. If there's anybody from the Windows security folks here, they might be able to assist.
Okay. Let me see here. 1 second.
We've got other mics as well. Other folks. We can't have been that clear, folks.
We told them everything they needed to know.
That's
There's
it.
No questions. That's good.
Oh, great. We got a question over here.
This wasn't directly covered, but I had seen the BitLocker escrow into Azure Active Directory. Can you explain a little bit of the differences between MBAM and the Azure Active Directory BitLocker escrow?
So I can speak to it high level, not exactly in my comfort zone. Is it in yours?
Probably not enough to
Okay.
interesting.
My impression of it, my understanding of it, is that Azure AD escrow for BitLocker keys will mean that instead of, well, it's going to come down to instead of keeping it on an on-prem server, you're going to keep it in the cloud. More detail than that, I'd need to reach out to my folks who work on BitLocker, unfortunately.
Okay.
But if you want to come up after, we can help connect you with those folks.
I would. There's some specific security configurations that we have in MBAM that may not be in Azure, and our security people would be interested in that.
Cool. We want to make sure those are covered. So, hi there.
There's someone
Oh.
over there. I think he's next.
Okay.
My question was about AppGuard.
Yeah.
Is it restricted to Edge, or can it also include other browsers, Chrome or Safari?
So Microsoft Edge and IE.
Is it likely to be extended at any time, or is it a feature of the browser?
I can't really speak to the roadmap. I think I probably get smacked by the folks over, my partners over in Windows. But for now, Microsoft Edge and IE.
So along with that, the IE, so it extends to IE, but is there anything special that has to be done, or do you have to activate IE within Edge?
Nope. So if you launch Edge and navigate to, or IE, excuse me, and navigate to an untrusted location, it's, I think under the hood, there's actually some kind of commonality in terms of how the security piece is done, so that it's effectively Edge underneath, but it looks like IE in that case. It's primarily built for Microsoft Edge. That's where we're innovating in terms of making our browser more secure. But the feature does extend to IE for customers who need to use IE for their line of business apps and that kind of thing for today.
Also with the compliance policy, is there going to be a portion for setting remediation action?
Which actions are you thinking?
So in SCCM, you can set a compliance policy or conditional policy and then also create a remediation action. I was wondering if it would do the same.
So wherever Intune can, it will auto-remediate. So generally this will come down to, things that are set out of configuration. And so a lot of those actually are just directly configured through the configuration profiles that Dune set. Typically compliance policies, and this was probably a good point to make during the talk, but compliance policies generally look at things that are driftable, which we can't auto-remediate, and usually involve some type of end-user interaction. And so that sometimes is due to the ways that Windows have exposed the CSPs, which are essentially the APIs that Intune can use to access these settings. But wherever we can, we will auto-remediate. But if there are specific cases you've seen where that's not the case, we should get that feedback.
Okay, because so you said auto remediate, but can you actually build it to where it would reset like the registry entry?
It usually because of the modern management stack through Intune. These settings are generally not exposed at the per registry level. It's like, it's a setting, you either want to enable it or not. And then under the covers, Windows will just handle it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's one of those things around granularity and complexity, right? Yeah. When we're thinking about architecting Intune, we don't want to rebuild DCM in Intune because DCM is great, but the amount of overhead that it creates is also very great in the large sense. So we're trying to figure out what the right actions are, and in this case, there's certain settings for which we know there's a remediation action, and we can build those in. But building custom ones is something that we would rather just find the important ones and build the right compliance policies with the right remediation actions and put it in box and let you do it custom, because then there becomes too much fragmentation and we never know what's going to happen.
Alrighty, thank you.
Next. Thanks.
Yeah, so in Windows Defender Exploit Guard under Network Protection, where does it get the bad IP list from? Is that the ISG automatically?
So
or is it?
it's the same, so ISG, exactly, the smarts we have in Smart Screen and Windows Defender Antivirus, those processes, and there's no, by the way, I should call it that there's no new data flowing with any of those. This is all data that's already on the client in these processes that they're fetching to use for Windows Defender Antivirus and other processes. And so those processes and features already have knowledge of the concept of a good IP or address and a bad one. And in the same way that it works the same way as reputation for applications. And so there's good, unknown, and bad for both applications and addresses. And then that's how that works.
Okay.
This one over here.
Availability of these new features, very excited about those. Are they going to coincide with the Fall Creators update for Windows 10, or will they lag behind that? Any kind of insight on that?
They're coming soon. I can't give you hard dates because I'll probably disappoint you. We're certainly targeting them in the Fall Creators Update timeframe.
Okay.
But as always, quality is a huge priority for us. If something's not a quality, we might hold it back until it's ready. But we really want to deliver these as soon as we can because we know that they're important to our customers.
Good. Thanks.
Thanks.
Hey, can you confirm for government customers whether Intune will be in the GCC, the Government Community Cloud, Vice, MAG?
I don't want to say anything that's wrong. I can put you in touch with someone who can give you a much better answer.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thanks.
Same. Sorry, sir. Any other ones? Okay, well, we'll stick around for a little while, and if you want to come talk to us, go ahead. Thanks so much.